And actually, the first question I think relates to what you just mentioned. So I'm going to direct this question to you and maybe Michael Kazitz as well. Since state and local officials are lifting the stay-at-home orders, what is the timeline for faculty and staff to return to campus?
I'll start, but then I'm going to toss it to Mr. Cassitz to give you some of the latest thinking of the task force. We're going to hold business as usual this May. We're going to continue to keep the campus closed. It's really too early to see much of a trend in terms of the spread of the virus. We're seeing some data that indicates that things are getting better, but we need more than just a few days. We need several days in a row of positive returns. And so I've asked the task force to give me some guidance and make some recommendations toward the end of the month in terms of what summer will look like. I've asked them to think about ways that we could be back to business in terms of taking care of people who need to have their business handled on campus, but to do so in a way that reduces the density on campus. How can we come back to work but do so in a way that not everybody is here at the same time, for instance? How do we do it so that we are continuing to handle all of the business that we have to do in an efficient way, but do so with the CDC guidelines in mind? How do we do that and maintain social distancing? So that's what I've asked them to do. Mr. Cassitz, what's your progress so far?
Well, right now we're working on what it looks like to come back to campus. It's not as easy as just opening the floodgates and allowing everybody to come back. It's still early and the virus is still out there. So we've broken down into smaller groups to discuss what human resources looks like and what their role in this is, and what facilities looks like and what their role is in this, and how can we best protect our students, faculty, and staff on a return to campus. We're looking at different scenarios, but we are being patient, and we have to be patient. We've started running risk models to determine what it looks like for our university, given the state numbers now and the cases we have. We're trying to get those as low as possible before we do anything. Since the governor's order has expired or will be expiring at the end of this week, we need to look over the next couple of weeks at what the numbers look like as people reintegrate to society, to run those risk modeling again to determine what the appropriate action and how safe we can make our campus before we ask our faculty, staff, and students to return. Thank you all.
So a related question that I'm actually going to maybe direct to General Scott Brower and Michael Kazitz is, what will the criteria be for returning to work, such as testing requirements, to wear a mask, gloves, etc.?
I'll go ahead and start with that. Right now we're looking at that. That's part of what the human resources subgroup is looking at. Different policies that we may need to put in place prior to a return to campus. And we've talked with our health and counseling center regarding testing. Is there a viable rapid test out there that's easily obtainable? We're still waiting on answers for a lot of this stuff. So right now we're trying to get as much information as we can, but we're still compiling it.
Hey, Bill, this is Scott Brower. What I would offer, I think what you're seeing at the state level from Governor Lee and the team here is, I think he's been very consistent with his approach on this. There's a few things that are mandated, and then for a variety of the businesses that are opening, there are best practices and recommendations that are being shared. Obviously, so many situations vary based on size, the type of industry, the location. There's so many variables taken into consideration here that I think the approach that's being used is to really share best practices and encourage people to use those. And it's really about instilling confidence in staff, faculty, and the students that are on our campus, that they're comfortable being there. So adherence to the CDC guidelines and the use of social distancing practices wherever possible. So that's, can some of the staff or faculty work from home? When can we do, remote type activities? And the more that we can do that, or the more adherence that we visibly show to these best practices of social distancing or cleaning, facilities, I think that's the route that you're going to see put into place across most of society right there, along with what Mr. Cassett said on, watching the models. We're working very hard right now to try to identify what are those indicators when we see something that's going wrong. Just because somebody comes up positive doesn't mean you necessarily have something going wrong. But before it gets out of hand, or is there something that can serve as an indicator to us to tip us off so that you can shut that down and try to prevent a significant spread.
Thank you. So the next question is more of an HR related question that I think I'm going to direct to Dr. White and Mitch Robinson. When staff return to campus, will staff be allowed to continue to telecommute through the summer?
I'll start with that and then toss it to Mr. Robinson. There are some who may need to and should, based on factors pertaining to that specific person or the home environment. Realistically, we can't just keep the university closed all summer. We have to be open for business, particularly if the state is open, if the community is open. We have to be able to serve those who need to handle their business on campus. So not everyone can telecommute. What I'm expecting is that there will be conversations between a unit and HR looking at what would be appropriate for the employees, and then also what would be appropriate for that office in terms of providing seamless service to our stakeholders. There are some back office types of activities that really could be done from anywhere. And those, I think we can be very liberal in terms of how we work those work arrangements, depending on the needs of the unit. There are other front-facing, forward-facing activities and functions that need to have a significant on-campus presence. And so there'll be some discussions about how we open and who should be here and how their office spaces would be configured, what kind of distance there would be between one person's space and another person's space, how we can manage people who come in to make sure that there's no violation of that space. And so there are a lot of factors. So I would not say that everyone will be able to continue to telecommute. I would expect some reasonable distribution of people who are telecommuting, some who are on campus, and then maybe having some alternative work schedules. But to the stakeholder, to that visitor, to that person who needs to enroll or pay a bill or get help with something, we've got to be able to provide the kind of service that those people need from the university as well. Mitch?
I never would have thought 6 weeks ago that a lot of our employees could work remotely. And here we are, we're doing it. Again, having an office that is open for the face-to-face people that come in to answer their questions and be available, yes, we need to do that. But does that mean that everyone's going to be in the office at the same time? Might be on a rotating schedule. But I think the whole point initially is that we keep the density of the people on campus less than what it was, so that we can make sure that we do have appropriate social distancing. This may also require that we wear masks. I didn't like that idea, but I've been reading a lot of literature that tends to support the fact that a mask doesn't necessarily protect you from somebody else, but it protects them from you in case you're one of those asymptomatic carriers of the virus. So there's going to be a lot of things that will be different, but at the same time, I think it's going to again make us stronger overall in how we deal with this and how we continue to serve the customers that we have, whether they be virtual customers or whether they be face to face. So in short answer, I think telecommuting will still have a point and a purpose, but again, it's all about keeping one another safe.
Thank you. So this next question is related to summer and summer classes. What will camp? And I'm sorry, I'm going to direct this to probably back to Mitch and maybe Michael Kazitz. What will the campus be like in the summer? Will buildings Will buildings remain closed, and will we continue to work remotely? Will sports teams be practicing? And so Gerald, you might want to chime in there too.
Well, I can start off. Initially, of course, we're going to be opening things gradually, I think, once we get a plan of how we're going to reopen. And of course, that'll come in stages. I saw not long ago a plan that was put together by Nashville about how they were going to be reopened. And I think they had 4 different stages, that if this happens and then they would do this, if they're successful there, then they would do something else. I think that's what you're going to see when our task force or COVID task force, and more specifically the HR task force, develop their recommendations on how we come forward and reopen the institution. It'll be like a roadmap for the institution about how we get there. There's questions, and a lot of people have questions about, well, are we going to change our cleaning practices and that type of thing with the fiscal plan? And the answer is absolutely. Before we left, I think the cleaning practices of the custodial folks was very, very, very good, and they had made a lot of changes. Will those changes be what we experience when we come back? Probably not. It'll probably be even more focused and deliberate. So I think you're going to see some changes there. And I don't know if that answered the question, Bill, but I'll pass it over to Michael Kazitz.
It is also contingent upon us being able to get personal protective equipment for our faculty and staff. Right now, hand sanitizer, masks, they're very difficult to get, and we've got things on order. We're trying different vendors. So we have to be able to protect our people when they come back. So the availability of those items will be instrumental in us getting back to campus.
I might also add one more thing too. I was thinking about this the other day, and I know some people who have already started making plans on when they would reopen. What will it look like when a student or a visitor comes into the office? Do you want to have them stand behind some kind of barricade, not a barricade, but an area where they don't go beyond until such time as you can determine exactly what their need is? I think that's probably incumbent upon all of us that we go and look at our office and figure out how people will interact with the people who are out front. We want to make sure that the people out front are safe too. And it could be that you walk in an office, you have to stand behind a taped off area and then wait there until someone can actually at least keep that social distancing away from the people that come and visit people in the office.
Thank you. And Mr. Harrison, the last part of that question was about, will sports teams be practicing? I think we kind of know the answer to that, because I guess there's been some NCAA rules submitted out on that. Could you give us an overview of where things are on sports in general, and if things loosened up, like for example, if you were able to practice with distancing restrictions, is that possible, or how would you go about doing that?
Well, thank you, Bill. The reality of it right now is none of our teams, our intercollegiate athletics teams, will be practicing at this point. The NCAA and the OVC have rules where right now we're currently in what's called a dead period for organized activities. We'll remain in that dead period until our state, our conference, and everyone feels comfortable enough to open up organized practices. I think the first phase that you'll see is what we call involuntary workouts. Currently, all of our facilities are closed. So no one's running around the track or shooting hoops in the dun or we're lifting weights in our athletics facilities. So the first step to restarting sport will be getting the okay to do voluntary workouts, which means the student athletes will be on their own, working out, practicing social distancing, but they can go into the facilities. And once that's open, then the conference and the NCAA will make a determination when we can regain organized practices.
Thank you. The nenext question is related to student workers over the summer. And I'm not quite sure, maybe Mitch, Mr. Robinson, maybe this is a question for you. What is the status of hiring student workers in the summer, especially if buildings are closed and we continue to work remotely?
Well, that'll be something that I'll have to probably look at and get back to you on. As far as I know, that once we are set up and can ensure that our student workers will be in a safe environment where they can continue to provide the support to us that we desperately need in the summertime, then we'll certainly open that back up. But not until we get to that point and have the roadmap to opening the campus back up.
Thank you. And Mr. Robinson, this is, I think, another question for you because it relates to fees or money. Will online course fees be assessed for all summer classes, even though some of them were initially planned as face-to-face classes?
My understanding is that those that have been planned for face-to-face will not be assessed the online course fee simply because there was not sufficient time to make that adjustment. So the answer is that those courses will not be assessed, much the same as what they were in the spring.
Thank you. The next question is, again, related to budgets and staffing and cutbacks. So I think I'm gonna direct this one to Dr. White and Mr. Robinson. Do you expect any layoffs, staff cutbacks, furloughs, salary decreases, et cetera, as a result of COVID-19?
I hope not. Since starting here 6 years ago, I have done my best to be very consistent in what I've said and my messaging to the campus community, and I'll do that again today. I have studied crises, as I guess all leaders have over the last decades, and really believe in the philosophy that it's very important to protect your talent, very, very important to protect people who invest their lives and their careers in the institution, because when we do that, we typically recover a lot faster than those institutions that can't do that. So I want to invest and support and protect our people because, first of all, we're lean to begin with. Our number of employees per FTE student is among the lowest in the state, and it's very important that we not go so lean that we can't conduct our business appropriately. That said, there is a wide range of options we'll have to consider if the budget gets worse than I'm expecting. So we have revenue that comes in from tuition and fees. We have revenue that comes in from housing and dining. We have revenue that comes in from rentals and camps and those kinds of things, we have revenue that comes in from the state. We've obviously lost a lot of revenue for the latter part of the spring. We'll undoubtedly lose some this summer. And depending on our enrollment in the fall, we could lose revenue in the fall. At the same time, we don't know what the state of Tennessee is going to do. The legislature, General Assembly, passed a budget before they suspended work in March, but they're expected to come back in June. And realistically, there may be some adjustments to the budget that's already been passed. And so my philosophy I can share very quickly, and that is that we should do everything that we can to protect our people. And I really am hopeful that with the investments that we've made and with the intellectual capital again that we have on campus, I know that I'll let Mr. Robinson talk about a task force that he's putting together to generate some ideas on how we could cut budget so that we would not have to cut into people. And my hope is that we cut things and not people. And that's entirely my philosophy. If things get catastrophic, however, we have to consider everything. But that's not the easy place I'll go. That's not the first place I go. And that will be the last stone that's unturned. And so I'll ask Mr. Robinson to talk about his task force.
Yes, Dr. White had asked me to set up a 2021 financial planning task force, and I will be sending out requests for nominations to that task force soon. We expect to have about 45, maybe more people that will be serving on that task force. As Dr. White indicated, the reason for so many people is so that we can get so many ideas from the ground up. This will not be a top-down type approach. It will be ground up, coming up with ideas, not only of ways that we can save some money, but also ways that we might be able to enhance some revenue. So all of those things will be on the table. I can tell you that for the current year, 2019-20, we did have some significant revenue issues that we're going to be able to make it through the end of the year, in part because of some CARES Act funding. We had spent about $2.4 million, I think it is, in refunds for housing and dining services. And so we expect that we'll be able to use that CARE Act funding to be able to plug that gap. But one of the things going forward for 2021 is what will university housing and dining services look like in post-COVID, not necessarily post-COVID, but in the middle of COVID. We are talking about things such as just going with single occupancy rooms. And if we were to do that, what would that look like in terms of the housing revenue? It being an auxiliary enterprise would mean that they would have less revenue to operate off of. So that's a part of what the task force will be looking at, is not only the overall university finances, but also the finances of some of our auxiliary units that will be hit the hardest. Again, as Dr. White mentioned, the status of the state appropriations is unknown at this point in time. But what we're going to do is develop various scenarios so that we will be prepared in order to know what we're going to do should a decrease in state support occur. The good thing is the Tennessee Higher Education Commission had us go through what they call the stress test a couple years back. And so we have several tools in our toolbox to use to address some of the issues regarding declining revenues and matching it with declining expenses. However, it still doesn't mean that we won't get a lot of other ideas from the university community. That's where it comes from. And so I think it's imperative that we have the right people on the task force to be creative and think of the ideas that we need in order to move forward as far as balancing our budget. So again, number one priority, eliminate things, not people. And I think those of you that have been around for a while, that's what we were able to do in years past, back when we had the Great Recession. And it's my hope that we'll be able to do the same thing here. There will be a lot of things on the table that people probably will not be very supportive of, but yet these are just ideas. And once the task force finishes their work, they will make a recommendation to the team that you see in front of you. And then that team will be responsible for making a recommendation to the president. So more to come.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question I'm going to direct to Dr. Norman and Dr. Gandy, and it's a little bit twofold here. There's a broader question, which is what is anticipated for the fall 2020 semester, and I think this is maybe in context of what will academics look like in the classroom in fall of 2020, and then I'll ask the second part to Dr. Norman here in a second. So, Dr. Gandy.
There's been no final decision about the fall. We're looking at all options. We would hope to be able to have face-to-face type classes. It might not be the classic face-to-face, but some type. We've successfully transitioned this spring to pretty much 100% online, and this summer is 100% online, although summer was always about 70-75% online anyway, so the transition there was much easier. So we're still looking at options. We would love to get back to standard instruction of some type, if not the classical type, but we're studying all options right now, and a decision will be made later as to exactly what will happen.
Thank you. And the second part is again for Dr. Norman, and it centers on like keeping students safe in this as we return in fall. How can we ensure student safety? So in the context of resident students or commuter students, how can we assure like parents' concerns and things like that? Could you talk about that for just a minute?
Sure. At this point, of course, we're still waiting for more information to come forward with what everything else is going to look like. We're certainly using the CDC guidelines to think about our programming differently and what that could look like, both on the ground as well as in a virtual sense. We are really trying to make sure that everything that we have on the ground would be able to be replicated in a different format if we are in a virtual means. And we're lucky. We had a lot of online programming to begin with. And most of our on-the-ground program was videoed, so people would be able to still have some of that experience if it was in a remote situation. So we're going to continue to build that up, try to think about all the different populations that we have on this campus, and really try to make sure we're meeting all of those needs while still making sure that things are as safe as possible.
So that covers all the pre-submitted questions we have, and I'm going to move now to the live questions we're receiving in Q&A. And the first one is actually a really good one. So I'm gonna direct it to Mitch Robinson again because it relates to leave, and it's so are we going to be able to carry over extra vacation time this year? It has been difficult to take leave right now with trying to handle everything remotely.
There we go. Had to unmute myself. You're absolutely right. I mean, I've been thinking about taking some time off myself, but unfortunately, I keep getting put on new committees. But that's okay. That's part of work. And then where would I go? Where would I go? Quite frankly, I think I would just get in my truck and start driving west. I haven't done that forever. But I don't know what I would do once I got there. So. You're absolutely right. I mean, being able to take off this time of year with the COVID going on is really somewhat of a challenge. I am one of those that this question applies to. And the good thing is we really don't lose our leave. It gets transferred to our sick leave. And for individuals that are in the state retirement system knows that sick leave does transfer or equate to early retirement when you get to be my age. But unfortunately, I'm not in the state retirement. So, however, that is something that Dr. White and I are still looking at. And the decision hasn't really been finalized yet. But the thing of it is, if we do carry it over, I just might point this out. If you do carry it over, we're still in the COVID situation. So I'm not sure when we're all going to be able to take vacation. And quite frankly, I think I'm going to do a stay vacation. In other words, I'll stay at home. I will not, I promise, I will not answer my emails or my other messages. And that's probably not true. I know that. But at least I've got a lot of opportunity to fix things up around the house right now.
The next question is, it's a staffing question, so I'm gonna direct that maybe to Mr. Robinson again. Is the suggested staffing, and I think this is in reference to a previous answer we gave, is the suggested staffing something long-term or unique for this situation, or if something like this happens again?
Let's see. I guess I can answer that a couple ways, not knowing really the context in which the question was asked. Could be regarding people that are working remotely. Would that be a long-term solution or plan going forward? I think that's going to be something we're always going to be looking at in order to make accommodations to people that have unique circumstances in the work that they do. If they can do their work from home or remotely, that's fine. Now, if we're talking in the context of budget reductions and staffing freezes and things like that, it's too early to really know how to answer that until that budget, that financial planning task force convenes and starts working on ideas of how we might be able to balance out the budget with various scenarios. Again, at the present time, we don't know exactly what those scenarios will be. It can be a combination of reductions in enrollment and also reduction in state appropriations. But if that's the context that it's been asked, then I'd have to say that we, at this point in time, do not know yet.
Thank you. The next question, I think, relates to Dr. Gandy's area, because it's about financial aid and CARES Act money. What formula will be used to distribute the CARES Act money to students? Will this be based on financial aid, or will they be able to apply for those funds? Also, when does the university expect to receive those funds? And Dr. Gandy, I'm not sure if that's you or I don't know whose question that should be. You're muted, Dr. Gandy.
Well, he's still muted. I can answer the second part of that. We did receive approval to draw down the money today. And what we'll do is spend the money first and then draw the money down. So it's just a matter of determining how that money will be spent and allocated.
Am I muted? Yeah, okay. Click the wrong button. Basically, of the $9 million plus that APSU is getting from the CARES Act, half of it, at least half of it, has to go as direct payment to students impacted by the COVID situation. For instance, and it has to be also what's called Title IV eligible, which basically means U.S. citizens. So all of our international students, DACA students, are not eligible for these funds. Also, if you were 100% online and you and then because of COVID, your class did not change, you are also not eligible. So we're still running the numbers on which students are eligible. We expect about 80% of our roughly 10,000 students to be eligible. So what we're looking at is how to give that funding, about $4.5 million is direct payment, direct financial aid to those impacted students. One approach would just be give equal dollars to all 8,000. The other approach would be differentiate between groups of students like Pell eligible and other types of students. We're still working on that. So basically all the eligible students will be getting funding, perhaps some a little bit more than others, but we hope in the next several weeks. As Mitch just said, the money just got here. So we could have not given this money out yesterday, even if we wanted to, but it's recently arrived. So hopefully over the next 2 weeks, we'll be able to get those dollars to those students that need it.
Thank you. Dr. White, I believe this question is for you. And I don't know if we can answer it at this point, but do you plan to bring on the new provost even remotely if need be?
I do plan to bring on the new provost, and the target date for that is July. And so stay tuned for an announcement.
Thank you. So I think I'm going to direct this to maybe General Bailey and Michael Kazitz. And I'm sorry, I've lost my place here. We've heard that there could be another wave of this later in the fall again. Are we also creating a plan for this?
Absolutely, we are. We've been talking about this for quite a few weeks now. The expected resurgence is in November, or a potential resurgence. Dr. Perry Scanlon is a virologist on our faculty, and he is at the forefront of all of this, and he's letting us know what's going on, and we are formulating what happens if there is a resurgence. We also have to take into account how much better prepared are we for this? What type of PPE will we now have in stock if this does resurge? And also, how close are we to a vaccine? Because that would be a game changer for us. But we are planning for that.
Bill, I will add that the strategic long-range planning team is looking 6 to 24 months out, and there's several options that we are reviewing in terms of educational models that we're looking in terms of doing an analysis to make a determination which direction should we go in. So the answer is yes. From a long-range perspective, we're looking at the changes and also information or data that we may receive relative to COVID and try to prepare for it as best we can.
Thank you. The next question is in regard to merit raises. So possibly Dr. White and Mr. Robinson, how will this impact merit raises?
Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, the legislature the General Assembly passed a budget in March that had what would account for about a 1% pool to give to those eligible for a raise. And in the past, we've added to that. So if the state's portion was a certain amount, we would add to it. So initially, we were hoping to be able to have about a 1.5% merit pool. Given the very significant hit to the budget since then, if that money is continued in the budget, then we would give in that merit pool what the state has allocated, which is equivalent to about a 1%. Now, frankly, I'm not particularly hopeful that once the legislature convenes again in June, that money will stay in there. And so it is quite possible that the money does not continue in the budget allocation. And if that's the case, then we would just proceed without anything for merit. That does not include financial contributions to due to promotions like faculty promotions and the kinds of things that we've always given before for someone who finished a degree, so got a degree that supports that person's work. Those kinds of things we would continue to do. But the other piece is going to really depend on what happens to the state contribution. And I will say that we have discussed in the senior leadership team that if there is any money that comes from the state for a merit pool, the will at this moment is to give an across the board, just because it's such a small amount that there's not a lot of difference between a high performer and a medium performer. And then the other piece is that even though merit would cover January through December last year, right now there's not a person on our campus who's not a hero. And so we would want to reward anyone who got even a reasonable evaluation. But this is a wait and see depending on what happens in the General Assembly in June.
The next question is about possible start back in the summer, or what time frame for staff. So Michael, I'm going to direct that question to you. Am I understanding correctly that for now the plan is to telecommute, or the plan to telecommute will go through the whole month of May, or when is the next date we can expect an update on the return? And I believe we've already clarified a little bit of that in our last announcement from the task force, but could you expand on that, Michael?
Yeah, we're looking at making a recommendation to the senior leadership team regarding a plan to return to campus, or multiple scenarios to return to campus at the end of May. So as it stands right now, we're being cautious, and we're going to look at the numbers over the next several weeks. So I wouldn't anticipate anybody coming back before June.
Thank you. And I realize we've got about 3 minutes left, so maybe one or two more questions. The next question, do you know if we will still be able to use our education benefits throughout the summer and possibly the fall? Mitch says yes. Anybody have anything to add? I'll jump to the next question. So we will pay student workers will we pay student workers for the summer like we have done for the spring? They don't have to work, but still get paid. Mitch?
I believe that ends with this semester, and then we start all over again in the summer with student employment. I do not know of any plans that the federal government has to extend that to summer employment. It only actually went through the end of this semester.
Thank you. And I want to do this. This is a possible furlough and retirement question. So maybe Mr. Robinson, you again, with the possibility of budgetary needs, if furloughs will be looked at to reduce cost, will voluntary retirement be a consideration? If so, has there been any talk at the state level for persons not in the state system to be able to switch to the state retirement plan, similar to what was offered about 10 years ago?
Okay, first of all, about voluntary retirements, again, that'll be something that the 2021 Financial Planning Task Force will have to look at as potential alternatives as far as early retirement incentive plans, if that's what they want to look at. But as far as being able to switch from an optional retirement plan to the state retirement plan, I have not heard of any conversation to that effect.
Thank you. So we're now at the hour, so we're going to have to stop there. As a reminder, we'll be posting these recordings or the recordings of these sessions on our social media sites where additional questions can be submitted. I apologize we didn't get through all the questions today. There were many very good questions, but thank you, and look on our social media pages for more information. Thank you for joining us.